Welcome to the Dan Norton Show. It is Sunday, September 14th, 2025. This is a show on which I promote Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, a philosophy of reason, egoism, and capitalism. And I invite you to participate. You can participate in the chat. You can ask comments or ask questions, make comments, or just say hi. And you can also call into the show. There's a Zoom link pinned in the chat, as well as a phone number you can use. So thanks everyone for being here, and thanks for the likes on the stream. It's time to use my right to free speech to promote Ayn Rand's philosophy. That's what I said in the title today. That was on my mind, the topic of free speech, because it's been big in the news recently in connection with Charlie Kirk's assassination. That tragic event, which happened actually during my last live stream. Well, it happened before, but I found out about it during my last live stream. Someone had posted in the chat that he was shot, and it was not clear. I don't think at that time that I think he might not have died when I got the news, but by later in my live stream, it had been confirmed that he died. So that was really unfortunate and tragic, and we had a moment of silence. And since then, the topic of free speech has been big in the news. At least it seems to be, based on what I've been following. So I thought I would say something about that in the title of today's show. Now it's very important that no matter what your point of view is politically, that it's not good to resolve things by violence. It's good to use your freedom of speech to persuade people to your point of view. And that's what I try to do here on this YouTube channel. So if you have a different point of view out there, I welcome you to engage with me in a civil, respectful kind of way through chatting or a live discussion if you want to call in. All right, so there are a number of directions I could go here at the beginning. I could talk some more about free speech, or I could talk about other things, but I do want to give priority to you all in terms of the topics I cover here. You all can shape the show. So if there's something in particular that you want to discuss, I invite you to mention that in the chat. And now is a good time to put your topics in the chat because you don't have much competition later on. It might be harder if we're already in the midst of a deep discussion of something. I see we've got our first chat of the day from Simon, who says, the only ideas consistent with healing the West. I guess you mean Ayn Rand's ideas. Yeah, I think that's right. Western civilization is a value worth defending, a civilization of reason. Now, faith has been part of the history of Western civilization, especially in the Middle Ages. The Age of Faith, it's sometimes called. One segment of which has been called the Dark Ages. But Western civilization began before the Age of Faith. It started with ancient Greece, centuries before Christianity came to power. And one thing that was distinctive about Greek civilization was its use of reason. So people had this faculty of reason going back eons. It's part of human nature, but they didn't really understand much about how it worked and how to use it to discover knowledge about the world. They discovered some things like agriculture. That was a pre-Greek discovery. People learned how to plant crops and then harvest them in the future, and that was a way of having securing their survival in a way that wasn't just living hand to mouth as a hunter-gatherer. It was a more long-range sort of existence, and that took reasoning to figure out how to do that, how to have a secure supply of food. So there were some discoveries of reason. The wheel, how to harness fire, right? So there are some very primitive ancient discoveries, but there wasn't really an explosion of knowledge on the scene until the ancient Greeks. There were some discoveries in astronomy. The Babylonians had made some observations, and I guess they had some at least rudimentary mathematical system. But again, there wasn't really an explosion, a giant leap forward until the Greeks in I guess around the middle of the first millennium BC. So 600, 500 BC, around there is the birth of Greek science and philosophy. You had figures like Thales, um, uh, who are some of the others? Anaximander, Anaximenes, and Pythagoras. Um, so they were sometimes they're called scientist philosophers or philosopher scientists, and I think many of them inhabited the west coast of Turkey, so it wasn't Greece proper, where we know the country today to be. But later, the center of discovery and advancements did occur in Greece proper, in Athens, where you had Plato and Aristotle and Socrates before them. Um, and there was, I guess, a growth in free speech, but they didn't have free speech, not entirely. There was a growth in freedom. I guess I should maybe put it that way. I think with the first democracy occurred in Athens, and that was a way of giving more people control over their own lives. There wasn't just one dictator telling everyone what to do, how to live. Um, there was an Athenian assembly, and they voted on things. Now, this wasn't perfect freedom. There might have been certain uh, property qualifications you needed to have in order to vote, and um, Socrates was voted to death, right? So he was speaking. He didn't have free speech, though, right? And some people didn't like what he was saying, and then the Athenian assembly had a vote and decided to sentence Socrates to death for going around and um, allegedly corrupting the youth with his controversial viewpoints. So ancient Greece was by no means perfect when it comes to freedom. But I think it was a step forward from the despotism that's preceded it. And much, much later, uh, the United States, I think, brought more into existence a more fully free society where things like the freedom of speech were recognized in the founding documents, in the Bill of Rights. Uh, so um, that was all going off of Simon's comments about Ayn Rand's ideas being the only ideas with healing the West. To address that, I first wanted to say something about what is the West. And I think fundamentally it's a society of reason. And over time, it's been more perfectly implemented, but there have been periods of retrogression like the Dark Ages. But at its root, I think it's about using reason to live. Okay, I see we got some more chats coming in. Thank you for that. The next one from Simon says, can you talk about Dr. Peikoff's DIM? I think it might be relevant. DIM stands for disintegration, integration, misintegration. And he wrote a book, for anyone who doesn't know, called The DIM Hypothesis, which surveys the history of the West. I think the subtitle is why the lights of the West are going out. So it's an explanatory framework for why the West has taken the path it has, and it's explained fundamentally in terms of the um, epistemology or theory of knowledge that various cultures have adopted at different times. Integration is a mental sort of process, as it's used in the title of that book, putting ideas together. I mentioned Thales before as one of the early Greek philosopher scientists, and he was looking for the one in the many. That's what some of the Greeks called it. He said everything is water because you can find water not necessarily in an obvious way, but in some way nonetheless. Um, I don't know what evidence. There's a great discussion of this in Leonard Peikoff's History of Philosophy course. I think he goes over some of the reasons that one might think, or that Thales thought, that everything was water. I guess it could take different states like solid, liquid, and gas. Um, and I guess you find it in living things. Living things drink water. But other philosophers they didn't think Thales was right about that. They thought everything is fire. This is Heraclitus's idea, or everything is change, uh, an idea attributed to Heraclitus. And then some philosophers, eventually you get to someone, Empedocles, who thought there were four fundamental components that made up everything else, just in different combinations: earth, air, fire, and water. And if you just rearrange those into different combinations, you get all the stuff of the worlds, all the shoes, ships, and sealing wax. I think that's the example, or the phrase Dr. Peikoff uses. So they were trying to have an integrated view of existence instead of just observing all the disparate things in the world. They were looking for certain fundamental building blocks that unite them. And today we have the atomic theory. There's, I don't know how many it is, 100 plus elements in the periodic table, and you put all those into different combinations, and you get all the stuff that makes up the world. So I think that's a modern version of looking for the one in the many. But of course, you can have a disintegrated view where you're not looking for commonalities, and um, you could also have a misintegrated view where you are looking for commonalities, but you don't find the right ones. Like you might say Thales was a misintegrator because he was looking for the one in the many, but the one that he thought there was, water, wasn't actually the thing that united all the disparate stuff. Um, so a super integration, an example would be, oh, Fredrik says 118 elements. Okay. Hi, Fredrik. Um, thanks for that. Uh, a super integration example would be Isaac Newton's laws of motion. These are laws of motion that apply to everything in the world, everything in the universe. The universal law of gravitation. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Force equals mass times acceleration. It just integrates so many different things. And then you have quantum theory, which uh, attempts to describe things in the quantum worlds as opposed to the grand scale that Newton was focused on. But there's an attempt to integrate those. So some people now are working on what's called the grand unified theory that attempts to integrate all the physical theories of physics. I think the quantum theory, along with I guess Einstein's relativity theory. Um, so integration is essential to science and the human way of dealing with the universe. By discovering these universal laws, we can harness the universe and make it do our bidding. We can use it to advance our values. Think of all the technology we can use. Like right now, we're having this conversation over the internet, right? You all are, it could be hundreds, thousands of miles away from me, but because of these scientific principles that have been discovered, we can um, use them to make nature serve our values. And one of our values, one of my values, is being able to promote my ideas to a large audience, get objectivism out there. As I say in the title, it's time to promote Ayn Rand's philosophy. And science is helping enable me to do that. All right, so there's a little about Dr. Peikoff's dim hypothesis. There's a lot more one could say about it, but I see we've got a lot more chats coming in here, so I want to get to some of these other chats. Simon says his spelling is all over the place, just very tired, got back from traveling. Welcome back. I think you said you were in England, if I recall correctly. I guess that's where you're based. Hi, Leighton Preon. Uh, Greg, hello. He says Age of Faith is a Will Durant reference. Maybe. Will Durant is a historian who I think he wrote a great series called The Story of Civilization. And it's a series of 11 books. It's very long, 10,000 pages plus altogether, these 11 volumes. And one of those volumes is called The Age of Faith. So I guess that's what Greg is referring to there. But other people have called the Middle Ages the Age of Faith. I don't think that's uniquely a term that Will Durant used, although maybe he helped make it more popular since he did write a very popular series of books, which I actually reviewed. I wrote a review article of that series. That's my one publication in a journal. It was in the Objective Standard back in 2011 is when my review came out. But these books came out decades before that. First volume, I think, came out in 1935, and the last one was maybe 1975 or 80. I don't remember. But anyways, I highly recommend those books if you want to learn a lot about history from an amazing writer. One of his volumes won a Pulitzer Prize. And he's very philosophical, I think, compared to most historians. Speaking of the one in the many, I think he does an excellent job in many passages of giving you a mountaintop perspective on history instead of just drowning you in concretes. He's very good at summing up the big scale lessons to be drawn. Um, and I think his titling of the volumes reflects this. Like the Age of Faith is really getting at the fundamental essence of the period. And then he has another volume called The Age of Reason Begins. Again, that's not unique to him, using these terms like the Age of Reason or the Age of Faith. But I think he does emphasize that in a way that you probably won't find in many other histories. All right, Cleric says, I'm not sure about this. I think reason was more present in the past than generally thought, even if Western standards for free speech is better. Okay. So do you want to elaborate on that? When is an example of a period that has had more free speech than is generally thought? I'd be interested to know if you have a specific example in mind there. You say even if Western standards for free speech is better. So maybe you mean in non-Western places there's been more free speech than is generally thought. I'm not sure, but you can clarify that if you'd like. Stephen Harper is here. Hi, Stephen. He says, I wanted to do a super sticker, but I couldn't find a dollar sign icon in the chat. Yes, I appreciate that, Stephen. The reason is because I'm not yet eligible to receive super stickers. I need to have more watch time on my channel first. So there are two requirements of getting my channel monetized so that I can receive things like super chats and super stickers. And to get monetized on YouTube, a channel has to have 500 subscribers, and I've got that. I've now got 944 subscribers, so I have plenty of subscribers, but I also need to have a certain amount of watch time within the last 12 months. And what I need is 3,000 hours of watch time. And right now I'm somewhere above 2,000, but not yet at 3,000. Actually, I can show that on the screen. Maybe that would be a good time to do an update. I've done this before, but I'm happy to do it again. I'm going to show my current metrics. Oh, it's 943 subscribers now. It fluctuates, goes up and down. So I'm going into my YouTube studio. And I'm going to share this on the screen. Okay. All right, there it is. So you can see 943 subscribers right now. And if I go here to this dollar sign in my analytics, it'll tell me how close I am to being monetizable. So if you want to earn on YouTube, this is what you have to do. Um, you need 500 subscribers. So I've already filled that up. You also need 3 video uploads in the last 90 days. Got that. But then you also need one of these two. You either need 3,000 public watch hours, and I have 2,245. So you can see I'm most of the way there, but I've still got a ways to go. So once I hit 1,000, then I will be able to take super stickers, super chats. I could also get there by getting 3 million views on short videos, but I'm not doing the shorts strategy. I'm doing more long form content. So I just need to get my watch hours up. Hopefully, I'll be able to get there within a few months. At the rate I'm going, I think that's reasonable to expect. I don't know if I'll hit it by the end of the year, but we're in September now, so maybe by the end of the year. But if not, then I think it's likely that shortly after that, I'll be able to hit it. And then I will be very happy to take your super chats, Stephen, and anyone else's super chats or super stickers, because I definitely want to make this a self-sustaining, financially self-sustaining venture. So then I can spend more time on it. I won't have to do other things to make money, pay the bills, and eventually I'd like to be able to do this as a full-time thing and not have to do anything else. All right, I'm going to stop this screen share now and come back to the chat. Elliot Miller is here. He says, Dan, what's up? Hey, welcome, Elliot. Oh, Mark Moses is also here. Hi, Mark. He says, when you are ready to change subjects, I'll call in a little later to talk about my attempt to spread better ideas in the area of local government scope and policy. Great. Yeah, you can call in anytime. Actually, you can call in right now. Um, I've gone over most of these chats, but I'm happy to bounce back and forth between doing a call with someone and engaging with the chat. So now is a good time to call in. I've met Mark before, so I know Mark a little bit, and he can tell us more about his topic there. He's written a book, which I've read some of. I think I read the intro or maybe the first chapter, but it's been a while. I'd like to read the whole thing eventually, but I have a huge reading list right now. So, but I did tell Mark in the past that he's welcome to come on and talk about his ideas or his book or so. Yeah, now is a good time to click that Zoom link, and then I can take your call. Greg says Dr. Peikoff remarked in one of his talks of a vanity plate he purchased after the dim hypothesis that read dimwit or dimwit. Okay. I didn't know that. He had a license plate that said that. Huh. Oh, Jasmeet is here. Hi, Jasmeet. I saw you in the last chat, I think. Hmm. And you say, can you explain this philosophy in short? I can do it in very short, in a nutshell. But then I want to take this call from Mark. I see Mark has entered the waiting room on Zoom. So, but just very briefly, Jasmeet, um, Ayn Rand's philosophy um, promotes reason as opposed to faith. So just to flesh that out a bit, there are many different religions, faiths around the world, like Hinduism. I think you're from India, maybe. So there's Hinduism, Sikhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism. All those are various kinds of faith, which I take to be um, accepting certain beliefs without evidence. When you just take something on faith, that means you're believing it without evidence, as opposed to believing something on the basis of reasons or on the basis of logic. Um, so Ayn Rand's opposed to faith, and instead she advocates following your irrational, logical judgments in the evidence of your senses. So that's a very fundamental aspect of the philosophy. There's no supernatural world or realm. There's no gods, no heaven, hell. That's all supernatural. And if there were evidence for such things, then okay, you could there would be grounds to believe in it. But if there's not, then Rand would reject that. And then in ethics, she supports egoism, living for yourself, not sacrificing yourself for the sake of others, or trying to destroy yourself and meld with the universe and become part of, um, I guess, nirvana. I'm trying to think of some Indian concepts because I think you're probably from India and maybe you can relate to those more. So it's a common idea of Buddhism that you deny the self and you just meld with the universe at large. You annihilate your own individual identity, desires, preferences, because that's a source of suffering. But if you can somehow um, overcome your individualistic nature and have a more collectivist nature and meld with the universe at large, that's the way to go according to an anti-egoist philosophy. But Ayn Rand says no, individuals are real and their highest purpose is to pursue their own happiness in life. Their own life is the most important thing, their own life and happiness. And then politically, she stands for capitalism, which means uh, this is, I think, a very misunderstood term, capitalism. But as Rand thinks of it, uh, the only proper role of the government is to protect people from force. So you can't initiate force against other people. You can use force in self-defense, like someone attacks you, someone tries to shoot you or punch you. You can fight back with force, but you can't initiate force. That's not proper on Rand's view. And the government's role is to protect us, protect people from force through a police system, for example, to get force wielders out of society. So, like robbers who want to use force to take your property, they're not going to offer you something in exchange for your property. They just grab it by force, or maybe they threaten you with a gun to get you to turn over their property, your turn over your property. And police arrest robbers, throw them in jail. They get arrest murderers who use force against people. So the only proper role of the government is to protect individuals from force initiators. It's but it's improper for the government to become an initiator of force itself and coerce people to do things like coerce people to fund other people's projects through taxes, for example. Or you have to I have to pay for other people's retirement through Social Security. Many countries have this, or Medicare. I have to pay for other people's medical care, and they have to pay for mine, right? I don't. It goes both ways. Like no one should be forced to pay for me, and I shouldn't be forced to pay for anyone else. We should all be responsible for ourselves, and we can voluntarily get together and um, engage in certain programs like insurance. We can voluntarily buy insurance, but we shouldn't be forced by the government to do that or to do anything else. So all these government programs, which are very common around the world, healthcare programs, retirement programs, public education, that's another one. You're forced to fund anything that's funded by taxes is um, illegitimate, at least the funding aspect of it. Like there should be education, but it should be private. On Ayn Rand's view, it shouldn't be public. In other words, people shouldn't be forced to pay for these things through taxation. So there's a little bit about Ayn Rand's philosophy. That's actually longer than I thought I was going to go. Um, but you can also look on the background I have to get some more ideas of what the philosophy is about. I listed some of the concepts like reason, egoism, and capitalism, atheism, free will, objectivity, logic, etc. Um, so that fleshes out a little bit more. Oh, I see we got like two people in the waiting room now. Frederick Sebastian is also here. Um, okay. Frederick, could you indicate what you'd like to discuss in the YouTube chat, if you don't mind? Okay, so now I think yeah, now I'm going to take Mark's call, but let me just make sure I have my Zoom settings correct, and then I will bring him on. Almost there. Okay. All right, I've just admitted Mark, and I'm going to have to ask him to turn on his video if he wants to do video. But first, I think he should be able to do at least audio. I don't know if you can unmute yourself, Mark.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
And my
good.
video's
Let me just
been,
put in
yeah,
my,
my video's disabled. Uh,
okay, just a second. Let me put in my AirPod and then I can give you permission to enable your video uh, through the host tools here. Okay, now you should be able to start your video.
there we go.
Hey, welcome.
Nice to see you.
Good to have you here. I see you've got a virtual background as well.
That's right.
The Municipal Financial Crisis, a framework
Right.
for understanding and fixing government budgeting.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I got that, even though you didn't have to move your head. I think I
Yeah.
figured out what it was.
Yeah, you
Great.
got it.
Yeah, so you can introduce yourself. I'll just say I said a little bit before you came on. So I've met you at conferences before. I think we first met at a conference some years ago, and you wrote a book about the topic that's on your backgrounds, and I guess that's what you're interested in discussing. But go ahead and feel free to introduce yourself further than what I already have said, or however you want to get into
Sure.
it.
Yeah, I'll give you a general intro, and then if you want to focus the conversation on things that you think might be especially interesting to you or your audience, that's all good. But
Okay.
just as far as the connection with objectivism, I read Ayn Rand as a teenager, attended Dr. Peikoff's courses when they were offered on reel to reel tape back in the late 70s and early 80s. Uh, my professional kind of path, I majored in engineering and kind of got into service industry type work early in my career. And so, since I wasn't really academically inclined, I wasn't going to be a philosophy major or kind of go the same kind of route you did. I there wasn't a whole lot of additional content that kind of kept me engaged and growing with objectivism. We didn't have the level of content available today, so I did keep up with things like when Dr. Binswanger's book How We Know came out. I read that and OPAR, so I kept some connection, but I was busy with career and raising a family, and so I started getting back into it the last several years. And one of my friends, about 15, 17 years ago, said, well, you have an interesting philosophical perspective from objectivism. Your My professional work wound up leading me into local government, where I worked for about 3 decades in finance and administration. And so I was observing all these things at city halls and in special districts and local municipalities, mainly in California. And he suggested that I should write about it, and that planted a seed uh, that slowly developed, because there wasn't really a model for how do you take the ideas of Ayn Rand and where it's helped you think through things more clearly or have solid principles to apply and a moral perspective on things. How do you apply that to kind of real world events or things that are kind of out there aside from philosophy? And Alex Epstein was really a model for me in that he took energy as his subject matter, learned about it, developed it, and has written 2 books now that have applied Ayn Rand's ideas to the area of energy, and he's risen to the point where he's exceptionally influential because, and he talks about it, he's used Ayn Rand to help express ideas clearly. People really appreciate it. People pay him to help formulate their ideas and get better understanding of energy. Well, I'm trying to do the same thing with local government policy, which, if it sounds like a bit of a stretch, it's because it is in a lot of ways, because our city halls have just become cluttered with just so many different things. If you look at just in the last 40 years, maybe, city halls might have 4 departments back in the late 70s or early 80s. Now, even in a small city, you've got a dozen different departments because you've introduced all these other things, economic development and DEI and environmental issues. All these things are crammed into city halls, and the scope, I call it systemic scope creep, because the bottom line is, and if you kind of want the punchline, it's that it's impossible to administer or budget for an amorphous organization. And our cities have no identity. They don't commit to being anything. It's pragmatism in practice, right? They make up who they are and what they are from council meeting to council meeting. And I think you certainly could have made these arguments, 20, 30 years ago and been right. But now, the last 20, 30 years, there are just so many concrete examples of how this approach is failing people. And so that's really what I try to do in my book, is say, hey, this all this stuff you're running from, you're afraid to turn things over to private industry because you consider that to be ill motivated, right, with a profit motive. And yet, look how far you've gotten with when you take over a utility and run it as a municipal utility, and you run it into the ground. So that's the kind of thing I cover in the book. I was lucky enough to get an international publisher, Palgrave Macmillan, to publish it, which I think is particularly interesting because, number one, I had no track record as an author. I had no following to speak of. They just liked the idea. They thought there was room in their library to have this kind of practitioner's perspective with a philosophic bent. And so got it published a couple of years ago, and then I've been promoting it and using it to network and spread better ideas in local government. And it's been received very well. And I think for the reason that Alex has been so successful, when you present a positive type of perspective, and I'll back up a second, because one of the motivations for my book was I saw people you might characterize as, or they might characterize themselves as, fiscal conservatives or libertarians, who were very ineffective at helping control the scope of local government and controlling costs. They would vote no on things, but they couldn't explain why they voted no. And I wanted to give them a positive kind of vision and a positive answer, because these types of council members would get marginalized and backed into a corner where people would say, oh, all you do is vote no on things. You stand in the way of progress. What's your positive vision? And I say, no, it's the other way around. It's the people who keep expanding the scope of City Hall that are getting in the way of progress. They're the ones that are crowding out, whether it's charitable organizations or for-profit organizations, because that's the nature of what happens when you pull all these things into the bureaucracy of a city hall.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'd like to learn more about this. When I think of Ayn Rand in connection with government, I'm usually thinking maybe at a more national scale, or the most fundamental issues of like I was talking about with Jasmeet in the chat. I was explaining some of the very foundational principles of objectivist political philosophy. You don't initiate force against others. And so there's a police force, and there's a military and a court system. But I guess you're dealing with it at a level that I don't usually think about it myself. You're specifically targeting local governments. But I guess there's some similarities. Like you talked about what was the systemic scope creep. I was taking some notes and I noted that phrase you used, and I think you could see something similar happening at the federal level, right? So we have government doing all these things today, which I don't think it should be doing. Some of which I mentioned before you came on, like the public education system, Social Security, paying for other people's retirement, paying for other people's medical care. There's been a systemic scope creep that is an increase in the role of the federal government, and I guess that's what I'm more focused on. But um, I guess it also happens at the local level, and
Oh,
that's what you
absolutely.
specialize in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened, right? It's like, okay, these, governments were initially formed to provide some kind of structure for, well, I mean, ideally for police protection. I know fire is snuck in there as well in public safety. And then, just historically, uh, you've had lobbying from the beginning. I think that's kind of a misconception. People think, oh, we had this free market, that somehow didn't work, and that's why we had to implement all these things, right? Well, no, we had people that wanted to use city hall just the same way we have people that want to use federal government to promote their policies, and they're not willing to, well, they don't want to compete in a real market. They don't want real free trade. And so and that's changed the form, how streets have been managed, how water has been delivered, how wastewater systems operate. We had paralleling kind of systems and competing systems in some of the larger cities at some point. But then you get somebody who wants to use the power of government to take that over, not to solve any real problem, that because, right, the market can solve problems. You can have any problem out there is eventually going to be solved by the market, and you have a self-correcting mechanism. But the answer to some people's discomfort with that, or they want to push their solutions on top of things, winds up being to make it a public utility, whether it's the city takeover of the roads, whether it's the city takeover of water or wastewater or garbage or any of these things. And so now there's just a lot to untangle, because now there are all these dependencies, because you've built this system. It's dependent on one wastewater treatment plant or one water plant. You don't have real competition. You don't have the threat of competition in these situations. And so, I advocate for, we need to sunset these things. We can't turn them off overnight and expect the market's going to provide a solution overnight. But we can put the market on notice that, hey, this city is going to divest itself of this utility in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, whatever the appropriate time frame is. Give the market a chance to cobble together some capital and innovation and an ability to fill the gap, rather than muddle along until it becomes really the same thing that happened to the taxi system, right? And the medallions. Uber just blew all that away with technology. And so you can imagine the same thing happening with wastewater, where you don't need a central treatment plant. You can, the technology is there that can be delivered to each house, where it can handle its own and not need to go through a whole gravity system to transfer the wastewater and then have it treated and disposed of. So uh, but when the technology is stagnates because you've got a municipal utility, it's kind of like a ticking time bomb. Or I'll give you another quick example. How about with drone technology? We've built these fire departments that are crazy expensive. We pay people to sleep in firehouses. It's all about readiness. They've taken over because we don't have a lot of structural fires anymore because of just better building materials and better building techniques. But the firefighters take over on medical response. to kind of to give them justification and something to do, and they crowd out private ambulance services. Well, what happens when we have drones that are ready to fight fires that can be orchestrated from anywhere, and we don't need to pay workers' compensation to firefighters? We don't need to pay overtime to firefighters. That's going to blow up the whole 1940s model that still exists across the country in terms of the way we deal with fire suppression.
Yeah, thanks for those examples. I hadn't thought of I've thought about privatizing the fire department before because this is an issue that's come up on my channel. Like, how do you fund the government without taxes? I have a couple of videos on my channel addressing that, and firefighting is one of the examples I address because many people think that that should be a government function, and I don't think it should be because it doesn't have to do with coercion or initiating force against people. It's a natural phenomenon that happens from time to time, like when you have a wildfires. Now, people can start fires when you have an arsonist, and that is an issue of initiating force. But it's that's not the exclusive cause of fires, right? They can just happen naturally. So I don't think the government should be involved unless only in aspects where it does involve some human being deliberately using fire as a destruction. But I hadn't thought of something like drones before, so it's interesting to hear you give that concrete example. Um,
Yeah, and that's really what I'm
and
trying to
the
bring to the
yeah.
table, right? Is, through kind of a philosophic orientation of objectivism, how would you think about these ideas as at the concrete level, at the level where you have to problem solve, and at the level where we really need to untangle it and divest our local governments of these areas where, again, it's holding up progress by excluding the capital markets, the capital investment, and where it marginalizes or crowds out charitable activities. Because once the city hall takes over something, yeah, the force is inevitable, and I mean, we've even seen this with the way they've gone after people who are feeding the homeless on their own time and on their own money, and saying, no, 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 this is our job. You're not doing it the way we want it done, so you can't do it. And then
Mhm.
there's a whole other issue with homelessness where, to the extent that homelessness relates to cost of housing, well, why don't you look at why housing costs are so much? It's like you've got zoning laws, you've got building codes, you've got all these other things that restrictions on or minimum sizes of lots and residences that don't even allow developers to even solve the problem, because they can't solve the problem in terms of efficient low cost housing, because the zoning laws and the building codes preclude all that.
Mhm. Yeah, you're reminding me of a point that came up in the last stream, I think it was with Holden, who called in the idea of the seen and the unseen from Bastiat, and
Sure.
I guess Henry Hazlitt also
Yeah.
has a version of this idea of the broken window fallacy. You just can't predict all the things that the market could do
Yeah.
to solve the problems. What you
It,
can say is like we can just throw money at it. You can raise taxes and build public housing for homeless people, but I guess it's harder to imagine all that there are better ways of doing things, which the market could solve.
yeah. And you wind up in this situation where, I mean, first of all, the assumption is, well, if government doesn't do it, nobody will do it. And that's just a bad assumption. I mean, it's ahistorical, and it really goes against, wait a minute, you're saying all this is important to the community, and you're saying the community won't rally to do this. It's like, how would you have any nonprofit, whether it's for softball or soccer or for bird watching or whatever, like how would those develop if people don't come together to fill the needs and values that they have? So, but nobody really questions that assumption effectively. And I read Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson when I was maybe 19 or 20. And And then when I went on into local government, I just saw just complete ignorance in terms of, but I think it was kind of a convenient ignorance, right? They didn't want to think about the secondary or tertiary effects of things. They wanted to just write those off as unintended consequences and be and just kind of hide behind, their intentions or the fact that they're claiming to be working in the community interest and not take responsibility for the effects of their decisions.
Yeah, I'm going back to the something earlier you mentioned. You said that there's a kind of amorphous identity, and like from council meeting to council meeting, they figure out what they're doing. So I was thinking, like, if we say that the proper function of government is just to protect people from force, and there should be a police, military, and court system, then is there anything unique to local government that it should be doing on your view, or should there just be
No,
like a
it's the
local
same. It's the
police
same
and
principle. It's the same principle. And
okay.
I think the problem is, and one of the things I'm trying to stimulate is we should be asking ourselves, like, yeah, what is government? What is a local government? And so, I mean, I survived 3 decades in local government, and I'm not the kind of person who's going to push a philosophic discussion. I'm just maybe too introverted for that, but I certainly don't shy away from a philosophic discussion when it comes up. And I never participated in or overheard any kind of discussion along the lines of, wait a minute, like, what, why are we here? What is our charge? I mean, when a city council gets around and they decide they're going to develop a city mission, it winds up to be more like a competition for who can be more ambitious, who can be more spectacular in the way they express the ambitions of the city. And so, right from the start, as they're developing their missions, they're they're not looking at delimiting. They're not looking at, wait a minute, we need to define who we are and what we are. They're looking at how spectacular they can be and how ambitious they can be at formulating what their charge is. And so then you wind up with these missions that are so broad that anything can fit in. Nothing can really be argued to be outside the scope because they've put themselves. I mean, sometimes it'll be expressed as we want to maximize city services, like that's a good thing. But it's like, but no, maximizing city services basically means socializing every service you can get your hands on. And so
Mm.
you wind up seeing, and this is part of the systemic scope creep. And this is why the broad missions sets the tone for systemic scope creep, because nothing is off limits. Any problem that comes up, any new thing winds up being another excuse. I mean, look at the cities that took it upon themselves to, well, internet's a new value, it's a new thing. We have to provide free internet downtown. And then they wind up being clunky and clumsy, and by the time they get it implemented, there's a new technology and their system's slow, and they've spent a lot of tax dollars on something that, again, if there was a true demand and it, then that need would ultimately be met within the city. And you've got to question, if there isn't enough demand or people rallying together, you've got to question whether, is this really a viable activity the city should be engaged in.
So what are all the activities like? I'm just kind of interested in getting a list of all the things that city does. Maybe it's too long to mention, but maybe the most major, like roads has come up. You said sewage, like water treatments, utilities. Could
Yeah,
you rattle off maybe a
and then
list of
it
like, I don't know.
and then, well, you get these offshoots, right? Well, you get economic development where this, and see, this has to do a little bit with how cities think, right? If you're a council member, it's almost like, to demonstrate that you care about the local economy, rather than think of that in terms of, okay, well, then how do I make sure the city doesn't get in the way, and how do I make the city protects rights of trade and everything? Instead of thinking that way, they think, well, what can we do to spur on growth. And so they'll get involved in everything from city branding to try to give the city a higher profile to attract new companies. They'll provide tax incentives to bring in new companies, but they don't see that as, well, wait a minute, is that really a good thing? It's like you're spending tax money, you're bringing people in who, aren't ready to come in. If they truly are lured by your tax incentives, then you're bringing them in before they otherwise would. What about your current businesses? Is it fair to them that you spend their tax dollars bringing in competition? And not just even direct competition, but it could be competition for workers, competition for office space, things that push up the prices before they would otherwise have that kind of pressure. So, but from the perspective of the council member, oh, we have to have an economic development department. It has to have a budget. Yeah, we have to allow it to provide tax incentives. Yeah, we then need to give it enough status so it can't just be an economic development kind of low level analyst. It's got to be a director of economic development because that means we really care. And before you know it, you've got another department head reporting to the city manager, another activity that council gets involved in that takes it farther away from whether it's the basic services or even just the things it's already taken on in terms of roads and the rest of it, because it's more exciting to talk about what you're doing for the city than it is about filling potholes, which is one of the reasons why cities struggle so much with their infrastructure, because it's just not as glamorous. And it sounds like you're more on the forefront of activity to be pushing economic development. And then, of course, when DEI was on the upswing, you had to have a DEI manager. And a lot of cities, even though in private industry, a lot of companies are moving away from that, for public agencies, they're still holding fast to a lot of that. And so before you know it, you've got a dozen department heads reporting to a city manager, or now the city manager needs multiple assistant city managers just for span of control. And you've created this impossible organization.
I
And
was
that's
thinking
and
of
that's all from not having an identity. It's all from having this broad scope, this pragmatic approach to, and it's even advertised that way, right? It's like, well, we're flexible. We don't want policies. We want to be flexible. And it just really means we don't want to commit to anything. We don't have any principles. We're going to make this up as we go along. And that's the way most cities operate.
I was just thinking of Mamdani, this candidate for the New York mayor spot, who's had these proposals about the government running grocery stores. So that would be an expansion of the scope of government, which I guess hasn't typically hit most cities. But
That's almost
and then this,
tame. That's almost tame. I mean, as ridiculous as it is, and the former Soviet Union already proved in practice how that does not work. But and for a city in financial trouble, it's just unconscionable to even be thinking up new things like that. But the but we've got a number of cities across the country that are trying to form banks. They're, again, it's disparaging the profit motive. They don't look at all the value that banks give and the fact that, hey, they do operate voluntarily, that nobody forces you to take a loan with the bank. And yet, and like in San Francisco, the banks built San Francisco, and yet the city disparages the banks. They want to start their own bank, and all they really want to do is have a pot of resources that, including use their own investments as a kind of a funding source, so that they can give favored loans or favored interest rates to favored people, and they can kind of be big shot bankers. And I spent a few years in banking, and you know many people have this kind of fantasy of like they're like this is a big wheeler and dealer kind of banking world, and they don't realize how regulated it is, and yet they all kind of want to be in it. And so here's an opportunity for public officials to run a bank. You can imagine what kind of disasters occur every time. And it's not the first time a public bank has been proposed or formed. Uh, the, but you can't point to any good ones because they wind up going out of business. Well, one of two things happens. Either they go out of business because they make bad loans, because they're really not about making money, they're about political favoritism, or they they kind of hide the the fact that, and it's that opportunity cost, or those that unseen, where they're investing monies that, if those are really excess monies the that the agency doesn't need, then why doesn't it go back to the taxpayers? Why is it used to fund these, special loans?
Hmm. Yeah, so I guess a lot of what you're saying is just reminding me that of a point I should make because it's often not recognized, which is that we are not a capitalist society. Like people will often point to the US and say this is a capitalist country, and they will blame homelessness or whatever problem on our cruel capitalist system. But government is massively involved in our lives, and not just at the federal level, also in the kinds of local ways we've been talking about here, like roads, sewage system, and maybe increasingly, as you're talking with banks, if some cities want to start banks. So just note to everyone out there, this is a good example of how not
Yeah.
capitalist
and
we are today.
and I want to give you one, just make sure I fit in one more example, because this usually blows people's minds. And this goes back to fire. And I made reference to, fire still operating on a kind of a work paradigm from the 1940s, where you don't, like, why can't they be on 8-hour shifts and show up and do their shifts and go home, right? No, we have to house them. That's the tradition. And so now we're paying them to sleep, and we're we've got all these other problems that we have to manage, like HR claims that come out of the cohabitation at the fire station, and all these other, and then we have to build the fire stations and maintain them, and then retrofit them, and all these other things, right? Whereas if they were on 8 or 10 hour shifts and not 24-hour shifts, we could manage it differently, right? And why do the firehouses have to be fixed in a location? Why can't they be, uh, maybe sometimes a year the station should be located in, proximity to certain things, and other parts of the year or fire season they should be somewhere else. But nobody thinks this way because it's just such a staid, tired, fixed system. And so go back to during the pandemic, right? When I was driving around in Northern California, nobody on the road, right? And what that made me think about was, they're probably, I don't know, 20 to 30, maybe even 35% of fire stations are solely justified, and their staffing solely justified by response time. In other words, they were built to handle that, well, we still have to get across town, or we still have to get to a fire during commute times at 8 in the morning and 5 in the evening. We can't get across town, so we need this other station. And so all these stations that are out there that are justified by getting across town during commute times and staffed 24/7 that way were really redundant. They were totally not needed, because you could cover huge ground, in a fire truck in a flash, right? You could maintain all your standards, get across town without these additional stations. And by the way, these stations, they call it minimum staffing, but it really winds up, I think of it more as maximum staffing, because those are staffed for peak conditions. So we're staffing all of these fire stations 24/7 for peak conditions. It would be like if Macy's was running holiday hours now and had holiday staffing, in August or September. You know, it's like, no, you only need that in December, in the run up to the holidays, right? And yet that's the way we staff our stations traditionally, 24/7, 365. So so if you and I were running a fire station during the pandemic, we would have closed those stations. We would have rethought the staffing during this shutdown period, and we would have saved tons and tons of money because we wouldn't have been paying overtime. We wouldn't have had unnecessary staffing, and we'd have, I guess, somewhat more realistic expenditures. But cities didn't even have the ability to make those changes because all of those rules are codified in the labor agreements with the firefighters. So the fire chief couldn't change the deployment and shutdown changes. The council couldn't shut down any of these fire stations or pull back on staffing because these minimum staffing uh, terms are all embedded in the labor agreements. So that's just a little kind of picture of that's how our fire departments operate. And
Yeah,
the
you
cost, you
you
can imagine the cost at, 24/7, 365.
hmm Yeah, you just reminded me of minimum wage laws when you said there's like a minimum staffing laws. I hadn't considered like that other version of um, coercion of the
Mm-hmm.
way things work. Yeah, and you are also reminding me of the LA fires and how bad that was earlier this year. And I think some of the water reserves didn't even have water in them, or they couldn't get water out of some of the fire hydrants. So very bad system. Yet it's run by the government, right? If you had a private water and firefighting system, which has the incentives of the free market, you're going to go out of business, right? If you fail that catastrophically
Yeah,
in your
and a big,
preparedness.
I think a big part of that. I mean, there are a number of mistakes there, but I think a big part of that is just the whole perversion of the insurance market, where
Oh yeah.
the insurance companies are forced to insure in these areas that I don't think if they could really make an independent judgment of, hey, should we insure these houses that are basically, propped up in the middle of a forest? Should we really insure those, especially if these forests aren't, being maintained in a way that is going to help minimize the extent of fires? And so, they're it's kind of like people want to have it both ways, right? They want to build on a cliff and have this great ocean view, but they want to be able to insure that. And yet, because the insurance companies are to the extent insurance companies are forced to insure those things, or FEMA is ready to save the day, then they continue building in these areas that, the only people that should be able to build that should be building in a forest or building on a sea cliff are like the Mark Zuckerbergs who can afford to self-insure, and if the house goes tumbling down into the ocean, that's not going to change their, their standard of living. But to open that up for people that can't afford to self-insure with this false, kind of a false perverted kind of insurance market, uh, that says, oh yeah, sure, come on and build in this area that's prone to fires, or, you know build in this area that no insurance company in its right mind would go into business in, given the way the state is maintaining its own lands.
Or at least they have to be able to raise their premiums, right? There can't be caps, like
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
price gouging, right? That's I guess that would be
Right.
the
Yeah.
criticism. Like we can't allow that,
Right.
and then you have this disaster,
Yeah, and
like you
then
had
and
in
now in
LA.
California, it's become this whole state program of backfilling all this and providing a kind of a safety net with state tax funds to prop all this up. And then they wonder why all the insurers don't want to do business in California and why property insurance rates are going sky high.
Okay, so I guess I'm curious about what role, if any, you've seen altruism playing in all this. I know that's often a diagnosis that Ayn Rand gives to the underlying problem in a society. And I was thinking, well, maybe price gouging is an example of this. Like it would be selfish to allow the capitalist insurance companies to just reap all this reward. That's not fair to the little guy. Do you get some kind of pushback from that direction? Like it's just not fair if we're not providing roads and sewage systems and all this stuff to people. Um, so are these programs somewhat propped up by a kind of altruistic motivation? Have you encountered that at all in
Yeah,
your
I
experience?
think I have to think about that a little more, but off the top of my head, I think it's more the collectivistic thinking. I mean, altruism certainly plays a role because that's always going to be, there's always that fear, right? Always that question of, well, what about that person who can't afford the to join the soccer league? You know, isn't the city providing a great, service to them because they have a program for, low income people? But it's like, I mean, but again, that's a non-answer it's because nonprofits have scholarships, everywhere you turn around for people who want to get involved in their swimming teams or their soccer leagues. So there's but it certainly plays a role. But uh, I think I guess what I emphasized, or where I saw the first thing that really needed to be dealt with, was the collectivism, that we don't have community values. We have individual values across the community. We don't have a community good. Good is something that individuals can define for themselves, but not something that you can define as a community. And so that's really where I put the main focus. I'm thinking about and some of this was because in a first book, well, first of all, I didn't feel like I had the philosophic credentials to go uh, any deeper than I did. I mean, for a book on local government, it's very philosophical, but there's a whole lot more underlying it in terms of, if you really want to get into the underlying ideas, the metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, that may be good grounds for me for a second book. And I'm sure that would hit upon altruism, but the collectivism and the assumed collectivism is is prominent just in the whole way cities make decisions, right? And the way they get their own, the way the council members get their own political cover, right? It's like, well, we've decided this is in the community interest, so we have to do it, and that validates it as a worthwhile activity.
Mhm. So when you're making your case, I'm wondering about who your audience is. Like, are you going to people on council boards, so local city councils? And I'm wondering about like what the results have been in terms of trying to persuade those people. I'm just
Yeah,
in general, like I'm
right.
interested in your
Yeah,
thoughts about your audience and what effect it's had so far.
yeah. I'd say, as far as the people that are on city councils, it's the ones that recognize that there's a problem, don't quite have their heads around the source of the problem, and they need a way to be more effective at coming up with solutions and advocating for solutions. And I addressed one group a couple months ago, and it included publicly elected officials. And what I tried to help them with was seeing that, where in a way they buy into some of the bad premises and bad ideas that they're really trying to fight. And that part of the problem is, you, you can't just accept, oh yeah, people's hearts are in the right place, these are all with good intentions, so we'll accept the mission and goals, and think of it as it's just an execution problem. And it's like, no, the goals are wrong. And what's happened is, we've gotten a complete flip-flop, where the when the goals are is to maximize services or just provide city services, and not protect the rights of the residents and business owners, the organization follows that, and the conscientious of the employees follow that, and they just try to provide all these services. They look for ways to expand when they can, and then that leads us to more and more get socialized. So it's not a problem of execution, it's a problem of the goals are wrong. And what's happened is, and I try to communicate this to people on the outside, that the mentality inside the local government is that we are the city. Like, if you ask a mayor, how's your city doing, they don't think about, well, are people flourishing and free in their environment? They think about, oh, are city revenues up, or what's the latest new city program that's spending tax dollars, right? That's where their minds go to. And so what's happened is, in this flip-flop, is instead of the cities existing for the sake of the residents and business owners, it's the other way around. Because if you're going to try to maximize services or have as big an impact as possible on the residents and business owners, well, where do you get your money? Your taxes. So so now the residents and business owners are the means to the ends of the city organization, rather than the city organization being the means to the ends of the uh, of the taxpayers, ratepayers, fee payers. So you see how we've allowed it to morph into, save the city, what, at the expense of the people that the city was supposed to be there for. And so I try to change their perspective where, no, the goals are wrong here. We've gotten this set up to where the goals of the city organization are like bureaucratic goals that position the city as an end in itself. And then we make other bad assumptions about, well, if we didn't do this, nobody else would do it. Or we use sketchy methods where, and this is where you get from Rand, right? Full context thinking, get the whole context, or the Henry Hazlitt or Bastiat, think about all the implications, not just make decisions in this narrow vacuum, which is the way most analysis tends to take place. And you can't even really call it analysis, because most of the times when you see an economic analysis to justify some city, quote, investment, they've already decided to make the investment. They're just covering themselves, and they want to leave some trail that they at least went through the motions of doing some analysis. So I try to open up the eyes to motivated council members, individuals and groups that are at least somewhat pro-market oriented and realize there's a problem with cities and are open to ideas of how to change. But I can tell you, I know enough to know the change is not going to come from within. It's going to be when there's enough of a groundswell and enough of an understanding that, hey, this really isn't working. And what I'm trying to provide is the positive solution to start unraveling all the things that are not working, so that we can really unleash private sector initiative, private sector capital, whether it be in a for-profit or charitable type mode, so that cities can divest themselves of these things that they should not be doing, and that the longer they do them, the more obvious it is that they're not effective, and that they're running things into the ground.
So what is the reaction you get when you tell people, or you give people this perspective, like the city is there to serve the individual citizens. It's not the other way around. Um, so I guess you're giving a individualistic kind of perspective to maybe to council members. Do they, how receptive are they to that sort of individualist perspective
Well,
once you
it
say
winds
that?
up being a test, right? It's like, because some of them, claim to be pro-market, but then they get a little skittish, right? When you if you push individualism too strongly. And so this really separates, who really does see the issue for what it is, and who's trying to smuggle in a little collectivism and pretend that they're pro market and is kind of wavering, really. uh, but I've gotten pretty good reception from people that are I characterize as genuinely pro market, whether they be on councils or I spoke to a taxpayer group that uh, that I thought needed to hear something other than just complaining about the negative aspects of what's done. Wanted to plant some seeds of, but there's a real positive story here. It's like, this isn't just about beating down things that aren't working. This is about moving our municipal institutions into a position where we can flip this, where they truly do exist again for the sake. I mean, they were developed for the sake of the residents and businesses. So it's a vision of getting them back to that point. And that's been pretty well received, I think, mainly because people don't hear that from anybody else, right? And so, I mean, I'm the only one who's doing what I'm doing, to my knowledge. Um, that's a marketing challenge because nobody's looking for people like me, but it does fill a certain need, because the you know the it's kind of the bankruptcy of conservatism, right? It's like they want to go back to a better day in the past, or they feel like things aren't right, and they're correct about there's a lot of stuff that's wrong, but they don't know how to present a true positive vision of the way things ought to be. And some of it is their hesitancy to advocate for individualism, some of it is their embedded altruism. But I try to call it like it is and educate people as to, hey, you're not going to solve this unless you really take this on fully.
I'm wondering about the what in your view, if you have a view on this, is like the best and the worst city out there. Houston comes to mind as in connection with zoning. Like I've heard that Houston doesn't have zoning, yet the city manages to function fine. But I don't know if you would overall say Houston is a good example of a well-functioning city. Maybe it's only good in this certain respect. But do you have any opinions on like what are the best cities out there we can look to as examples, or at least partial examples of cities that are on the right track? And then also the flip side, any views on like what the worst cities are,
Well,
examples to avoid?
I can tell you the state that seems to be the center of the worst run cities, the most corruption, the the most in debt, is actually the city that, or the state that houses the Governmental Finance Officers Association, and that's Illinois. Uh, I mean, Illinois, the big cities, the small cities, uh, they're just, yeah, they're just out of control. And so, as far as good examples, the best ones are the ones you don't hear of, because they're the ones that quietly operate. They're not trying to be everything to everybody. They they through some kind of wisdom at some point along the way developed, I might just characterize it as kind of a minimalist approach to what the government's there to do. They keep their eye on the ball better in terms of, hey, we're here for the residents and business owners. We're not here to promote the city hall and the city bureaucracy. The residents are not a means to our ends. It's the other way around. And so they keep that focus somewhat quietly, and that's why you don't hear about them. But the more you hear about them, it's just the nature of it, right? The more politicized their decisions are, the more out of control they get, because everything's political, and then everything becomes about the bureaucracy and what follows.
I'm wondering about the crime in Illinois or Chicago, because it seems like they have particularly bad crime. I don't know if you see a connection
Well,
between that
they have
and
bad crime, they have bad schools. I mean, they do a disservice to everybody. uh, and and that's what happens when you when you when you run these kind of bureaucracies that take your attention away from core function of protection and get involved in a whole range of other activities. I mean, and then there's some other issues that make it tough too, right? Because when the laws are written, when the criminal laws are written in a way where you've got the police enforcing what really shouldn't be crimes because they really are not initiations of force, you've got another dynamic that comes into play. So they're so even within policing activity, which in general is a legitimate activity, you've got a lot of problems just by the fact that you create all these extraneous negative interactions with people over loose cigarettes, or selling loose cigarettes on the street, or things that should be ideally dealt with other ways.
Yeah. Keeping your eye on the ball, that's important. And I thought of Bernie Madoff in connection with all this because I believe that the SEC was actually tipped off by some informer about him, but I guess they were so busy doing all these other things, looking over everybody's shoulder to make sure they're following all these financial regulations that they can't catch the actual
Exactly, exactly,
criminals.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, and you're trying to be everything to everybody, and I guess bread and circuses is another thing that came to mind. Like the ancient Roman government, they would please the masses by putting on these um, uh, spectacles in the Colosseum and give everyone free bread. And but there's a cost to that. Like going back to Hazlitt, you look at the ripple effects of these policies, and they aren't good.
yeah.
Um,
So part of what I'm trying to do is well, my book was published a little over 3 years ago, and then right around the time that the federal government pumped $65 billion into local government, in kind of part of the pandemic relief. And so I think we were really on the verge of massive city financial problems 4 years ago. They There was this reprieve with all this influx of cash, which was way more than what was needed to make up for lost revenues during the pandemic, right? Because it was just, the number was just pulled out of the air, thrown at cities. A lot of cities couldn't even spend all the money they were given because they weren't even organized enough to spend the money. That's another interesting thing, with just kind of the stewardship. Like, cities have taken over all of the roads and the parks and everything, but they're not competent at maintaining it all. And so uh and yet they'll say, oh, we need more money, we need more money. But I did a little experiment in this one city where I told the public works director, you tell me what you need to do, and I'll make sure it gets prioritized enough, because you're coming off of a recession and you haven't been able to do these things. And he finally admitted that it didn't matter how much money I gave him. There were other um, dysfunctions just in his staffing structure, and it kind of, this is just another reason why cities shouldn't be maintaining streets. That there were problems with his hiring and staffing that meant no matter how much money got thrown at him, he was going to be limited as to what he could do in terms of street maintenance. And we saw this play out when all the money was thrown at cities during the pandemic, where they couldn't even absorb and put to use all the monies they were getting, because the organizations just could not handle it. And so, I mean, just kind of administratively and staffing wise, they just could not execute on it. So, because it's just such a slow machine and it's such a slow bureaucracy, where you've got to get contracts approved at council meetings, and you've got to go through all the bidding process and everything. And so the so so yeah, they're just constant examples of this. but I think that as this federal money is burning off, which it is, we're going to start to see more cities crack in terms of severe financial trouble. And so I'm trying to position myself as subject matter expert, where when I get calls from journalists, I can help them frame these issues and understand these issues so that better ideas get heard in these processes rather than some of the conventional same old stuff that really just serves to entrench the status quo even more.
Okay. Well, I wish you the best with all of this. And if anyone wants to learn more about your work and how to get in touch with you, if they're interested, learn more about all this, is there anything you want to plug here?
Sure. Well, I mean, my website is munifinanceguy.com. I'm at Muni Finance Guy. That's MUNI Finance Guy on Twitter. Um, Mark Moses, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, I'm happy to interact with anybody who's interested in applying Ayn Rand's ideas and free market concepts to local government policy. So I've made that my work right now.
Great. All
And
right. Well, I encourage
email
people.
is yeah, email is mark at munifinanceguy.com.
Okay. Thanks for that. And I'll put some kind of link in the description after the show to your stuff. So, well, thanks for coming in, calling in, Mark, and wish you the best with your projects.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great chatting with you, and yeah, enjoying your programming here.
Okay. Appreciate it.
All right,
All
take
right.
care.
Okay. See you later. All right. Glad to have Mark call in. That was good. Cover some new territory on the show. As I mentioned, mostly when I talk about government, I'm talking about it at a national level and not getting into the nitty-gritty stuff of city, municipal government at a local level. So I'm glad that someone with expertise could come on and discuss that. And I encourage all of you to check out Mark's content, and you can learn more about that. And we can help uh, promote Ayn Rand's ideas at another level, a level which might be very up close and personal to you. The city, the local level, maybe it could have a more direct impact on your life in some ways. But in any case, we got to promote these ideas on all levels, and I'm glad we've got another outlet there with Mark's work to do this. Okay, I see we still have Fredrik on the line. He called in a while ago, but about the same time as Mark, so I wasn't able to get to him for a while. I would like to get to his call, but I asked him if he could put in the chat what he was interested in calling about. Let me see if he said anything there. Um, let's see, looks like there's a conversation going on between Hookham and Robert Nacier in the chat. Frederick says, really interesting discussion here on local policy politics. I would have liked to chime in and say hi, but now I have to go back to my work again. I'll call in some other time. Have a good one. Okay. So maybe Frederick will call in another day. Although I still see him in the is he still in the Zoom waiting room? He still shows up in the Zoom waiting room. I don't know if he stepped away though. Maybe I'll check on that in a bit. Because I think I want to take a break now or very soon. Oh, I see earlier Frederick says nothing too particular that he wanted to call in about. Just wanted to say hi, talk about intellectual persuasion. Okay. Stephen Harper says, thanks, Dan. I didn't know the requirements for monetization. Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, I explained before how I need to get a certain amount of watch time, uh, 3,000 hours of watch time, and then I can start taking things like super chats and super stickers. I think that's the last point I got up to in the chat around there. And Jasmeet says, I am a Sikh, Sikh, even without the magical aspects. It is a great religion to read about for outsiders, but it's also greatly misunderstood if it comes to Ayn Rand. I like the philosophy from your explanation. Okay. I don't know if I've read any Sikh literature. I've read some Buddhist literature, some Hindu literature. Maybe, I don't know if it was the Bhagavad Gita. It's been a while, um, but yeah, I don't know about Sikh literature. Okay, then there's some discussion of firefighting. Robert says, "Hi, I'm here. What did I miss?" Hi, Robert. So I guess you heard the part of my conversation with Mark Moses about municipal government, local city governments, and Mark has a lot to say about making things better at that level. Before that, I was talking to him about Western civilization and its advocacy of reason as opposed to faith. I think those were the main things. I engaged with Hookem in some comments recently on some of my videos. He left some comments. And here he is now in the live chat. And I won't try to read it all right now, but hopefully after the show, I will have time to read through all the chats. I usually do. I think I've always done that so far. Thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate all the likes. Wow, we got a lot of likes so far, and that's great. Great to see. Okay, so I'm going to take a break for maybe 7 or 8 minutes and then come back and we can do some more. I'll read through some more of these chats, maybe engage with some of those, but feel free to keep chatting, bring up new topics, and maybe I'll take this call from Sebastian. I don't know if he's still going to be here. He still shows up in the waiting room on Zoom, but he did say in the chat he has to go, but maybe he came back. I don't know, but I guess I'll find that out after the break. So I'm just going to turn off my mic and camera during the break, and I'm going to change my name on Zoom right now so that's during the break, it shows up as Dan Norton will be back shortly. And then that way, anyone who comes by during the stream will know what's going on. Okay, I just changed my name. You can see it down there in the corner now. And it'll be in the center of the screen in a few seconds. And then I will also say in the chat, oh, he says, hey, I can chat for 5 minutes. Fredrik just said that in the chat. Okay, well, maybe I should take Fredrik's call before the break then, because if he has to go in 5 minutes, I might not be able to get to his call afterwards. So yeah, let me quickly bring him on now. Just a sec. Oh, I guess I can change my name back now to Dan Norton since I'm not about to take a break just yet. Okay. Make sure I have my Zoom settings correct. All right, I'm going to admit Frederick, and I'm going to have to ask him to unmute after he comes on. Oh, I thought I hit it. I got to hit it again. Okay, now it says joining. All right, now now he's in the Zoom call. Okay, so I'm just going to ask you to unmute, and then we should be able to hear you. Let's try that. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Frederick. You go by
Hi.
Frederick or Frederick Sebastian?
Yeah, it's a hyphenated name,
Okay,
so it's both. But
it's
in
both.
English, it's usually easier for people to just say Friedrich.
Friedrich? Okay,
Yeah,
sounds
yeah.
good. I'll go with Friedrich then. Well, welcome to the show. I think I've
Thank you,
seen you
thank you.
here maybe once before. Is this the first time you've been in my chat, or have you been here before?
I think I've been in the chat on and off, or whenever I find the live your show. That is, I think about 5 times. I mean, not that much, but whenever I do, I sort of let it play in the background for maybe an hour or so. So I've grown accustomed to the pacing and the ambiance, if you will.
Okay, nice. Well, glad to have you here on a call. So I don't know if you want to say where you're from. Sometimes I like to know if you don't have to, of course, but if you want to, you're welcome to. And you said you didn't have any particular topic in mind. You just were coming by to say hi, basically.
Yeah, I just thought about putting a face to the comment section, if you will. To the
Okay.
discussion page. No, I just want to say hi. I We haven't met in person yet, but I do attend conferences now and again. I mean, I've been into objectivism for. I mean, a lot of people I speak to are sort of veterans compared to me. I've only been in objectivism for 4.5 years, something.
Hmm.
So and I'm relatively young as well. So I mean, it's a larger percentage of my life as of now, 4 years that
Hmm.
is. But no, it's been really thought provoking, and it's a real growth experience. It really it's a tool for just growing at a different pace than I otherwise would.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you wanted to do video, if you or just audio, but if you did
Sure,
want to come on video, okay, then let me change the setting here so that you can start your video. Okay, I think now you should be able to do it. All right, there you are.
everything good.
Yeah, actually,
Hi.
you look familiar. I don't know if have we been at a conference or met, or I don't know when the last conference you were at, Objectivist conference, but your face looks familiar, so maybe I've seen you somewhere.
Well, that's promising. No, last time I was to a conference, it was well, I met Göran Brook in Oslo this December, but conference-wise, it must have been Amsterdam
Okay.
2024. Yeah. So the European conference. I also went to the Athens conference the year before that, and my
Hmm.
first conference was London 22.
Okay. So you're hitting a lot of European conferences. I actually haven't been to any of those, um,
Okay.
uh, but I might have seen your face just in a photo from the conference, maybe. Sometimes they put out promotional materials later. Um, but
Yeah,
anyways,
I think there's a photo of me in the Amsterdam conference. I think they posted one of those. I'm like one of the people there. No, but yeah, so no, this is like putting a face to it. No, I'm from Sweden, by the way. So
okay.
Stockholm, Sweden.
Uh-huh.
So like the hour is getting late and so on.
Oh yeah.
That's why, yeah, that's why I had to exit chat. But then I saw on the phone checking the live stream. to just keep to keep listening to the really interesting discussion you had with your previous guest on the politics, and so on. Of course, interesting.
Yeah.
I just thought, that was going to go on for a lot because, well, there's obviously a lot to say on it. So that's what I just typed in chat, like, no, sorry, gotta go. But no, yeah, I try to like keep good habits, getting to trying to maintain have good sleep, in my 20s and so on, so that because of the consequences otherwise down the line.
Hmm. So I'm
So no,
guessing if you're in Sweden, is maybe that's 9 hours ahead. Is it 11:20 p.m. there?
right,
Okay. Yeah, it is getting late. So
it is.
let's see. You're I don't know if you want to introduce yourself anymore, like say what you do, like if you're in school or do you work? If you'd like to, feel free to say any more about yourself. Um,
Yeah, sure. I mean, people might remember some of it next time they see me in the chat. So, no, my Fredrik Sebastian. I grew up mostly in Sweden, but also born in Guatemala. Grew up a few years as well in Costa Rica. So it's a lot of moving in my childhood and so on. But I've been quite stationary in Sweden for over a decade. So I'm mostly acculturated to Sweden. But of course, every time I was abroad, I went to American schools, and there's where my English was sort of cemented growing up or into adulthood. And then, of course, Sweden is one of the most Anglophone. I mean, people speak English as a second language in a very high density compared to many other countries, even OECD.
mhm,
So yeah, no, it's English is quite common knowledge. And of course, after reading Rand and before that, just reading, we spoke about Henry Hazlitt earlier as well, economics in one lesson.
mhm.
No, it just from reading books, I would actually say that English is my more advanced language compared to Swedish, actually. I can, English is such a wonderful language. You can, and precise as well. And I've managed uh, to get on that side. Uh, education wise. So no, it's wonderful reading Rand and talking to other people about ideas, philosophy, and of course life, its application to your own life. So no, yeah, that's a little about me. Oh, of course, I study and work. Um, mhm. So the work is not really to do with my studies. My work is I have a I have an interest in mixology, as it's called. It's other words for making complicated cocktails. But I applied that hobby, I monetized it, and then I actually make a good buck. So I moved out, and here I am.
Mhm. All
So that's me.
right. Well, yeah, thanks for that intro. And you said you started reading Ayn Rand a few years ago.
Yeah, I have to revise that number down to 3.5 years. I miscalculated. Yeah, so it was just like I think I finished reading Atlas Shrugged 2 months before the London conference. So I was fresh out of the just the heartbeat, the strong heartbeat Atlas gave me for
Mm,
the experience of reading it for the first time, and then I get thrust into um, uh, a friend of mine said, "Oh, did you know that there's this conference for people who are interested in Ayn Rand's ideas?" And I was like, "What? Really? Okay, where? Is it like in the States or something?" It's like, "No, no, no, there's going to be one in London." And those are inter-European flights are dirt cheap. So we hopped on a flight together and we went to the London conference, and I was surprised that okay, here are all these people. I got to meet Don Gate, Yaron Brook, and many other fantastic people. And that was really like then I thought, okay, yeah, so I'm not the only one. Obviously not. People, a lot of sales go to Atlas Shrugged every year, and I was aware of that before, but it was a pleasant surprise to see that it was not organized, but at least more active than I would have expected otherwise.
Hmm. And was Atlas Shrugged the first thing by Rand you read? Okay.
Yes,
And how did you come across that? What got you interested in reading it?
Alex Epstein.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, and also that approach. I mean, that's why I always credit Epstein with it, since it's his approach to why learning philosophy and particularly objectivism is so beneficial to oneself, and it's because it's a framework. Like it's this framework from that just gives you this cutting edge, in life. It gives you the best. It gives you a well, to the extent you understand it, the best epistemology out there. Um, and it's you buy these books cheaply from Amazon. You can read them and study them yourself to a certain degree. Then you can listen to lectures, but they give you this immense value of just having more clarity than many other people out there, educated in universities, for example, who don't really have the same epistemology, if you will. They don't teach the same epistemology. They're more like skeptics or but of course, the STEM departments are fairly good. But other than that, you no, it's a competitive advantage, and that's what the interest in objectivism is. That's the angle in it.
Hmm. So Alex Epstein, he's an expert on the energy industry. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm curious now how you came across Alex.
It was well, I was interested in the. I was studying. I used to study in the STEM fields. I recently switched over to more history and philosophy and so on. But in my years, well, both in high school and later in uni, it was energy technology, and well, of course, what that the subject everyone discusses, climate, the environment and climate change and so on. And then I stumbled upon Alex Epstein. I thought his method of analyzing it was really interesting and obviously very thought-provoking more than anything else. And then I thought, well, he's viewing this. He gave me a sense of clarity I never found in this subject before. And then he sort of casually mentions, and by the way, the way I managed to gain this clarity on the subject was through Rand's philosophy of objectivism. I was like, oh yeah, I recognize that name. It's really divisive. People either mention Ayn Rand as someone they adore or someone they absolutely despise. And then I thought like, oh yeah, I'll get to it someday. But then Alex mentions, no, read The Fountainhead, read Atlas Shrugged, because that's where I got my clarity in thought from. And then it became a no-brainer for me. Okay, yeah, I'll buy this book. It's really long, but if he says it's worth it, I'll give it a shot. And I mean, I was captured by chapter 2 or something. I read the whole of Atlas in about 2 weeks time, 2 weeks, 2 days, something. And no, just been buying everything Ayn Rand and ARI related from Amazon Amazon bookstore ever since.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, you're the
So that's
first
me.
person I know who has found out about Ayn Rand through Alex Epstein. Maybe there are many others, but you're the first one I've heard about.
Mm.
That's great. So then you've been reading other things as well. Um, Good. Well, thanks for telling me your intro.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm glad to put a face to a name. So anyone else out there who wants to do the same, if you want to introduce yourself, I invite you to come on and we can do a little chat and get to know each other some. So anything else you
Yeah.
want to say, Friedrich, while you're up here?
No, other than putting a face to the. I've seen your face a lot, but now we've spoken a bit. I've introduced myself and so on, and I've heard your description before, introduction, I mean. And so no, other than look forward to meeting you someday in person.
Okay, yeah, maybe we'll do that someday. I did think of one other thing I'm curious about is how you came across my show. I guess if you were watching Alex and you're on Brooke, maybe I was just in your YouTube algorithm and one of my videos got recommended. Do you think maybe something like that happened or what?
Yes, definitely. It's most likely Yarnbrook, the Yarnbrook sphere,
Okay.
if you will. No,
Okay.
I've watched. I mean, not live, of course, but I've at least watched possibly every single show since since autumn 2022. So
Okay.
yeah, going 3 years strong soon.
You're a very dedicated listener because he does a lot of shows. And
He does. But
and the shows are often long, right? There you go for a couple hours often,
uh-huh.
so that's a lot of content. Yeah, I can see in my analytics sometimes videos on your on's channel will recommend videos on my channel. So I think probably many people end up coming to my show through your on show, and I've advertised on his channel as well, like in the super
Oh,
chats.
really?
I've done
Oh,
a
okay.
few
Yeah, yeah.
times, not like as a sponsor where he reads it out in the
No.
but when he's answering super chats, I've submitted a few super chats, so I think some people have found out about me through that means.
Yeah.
All right.
No. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, Gotta go now.
Okay. Catch you later.
So
Bye bye.
yeah, see you in the chat. Bye.
Okay. Bye. All right. Good to get to know one of my listeners face to face, or at least screen to screen. So maybe that'll encourage some other people to call in sometime. Jason Adams is here. Hello. He says, good job finding Alex coming from the land o' Greta. Greta Thunberg from Sweden. Yeah, who Alex is, they've got quite opposing ideas, Alex and Greta. Um, Robert says the London conference was awesome, a great week combining ARICon student conference and ARC UK. My first time ever traveling to England. Everyone was sharp and nice. Good times. Okay. Glad you enjoyed that. I've been to England just once. It's been over 20 years ago now. I would love to go back someday. Maybe if I do that, I'll do a live stream from there. Robert says he's doing FYI 5 minutes with Robert and AB Nature goes live as always at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, so soonish. Yeah, so in about half an hour, you can check out Robert and Amy's show at Robert Nasier's channel. All right, and then I see there's a bunch more chats before that. Looks like mainly from Hookham and Robert. There's some from Greg. Yeah, maybe I'll read through some of those after a break. Should I take a break now or should I just end the stream? When did I start? 12:30, about 2 hours ago. I think I'll do at least the short segments. I'll take a break for 7, 8 minutes, and then I'll come back and do one more segment, though maybe it'll be much shorter than the pre-break segment. So I'll read some of the chats when I come back, and feel free to put in new chats, and I can engage with those as well. All right, now I'm going to change my Zoom name back to Dan Norton. Will be back shortly. And I will also say something in the chat. I'll just say, be back shortly. Greg says, have a good afternoon, Dan. Thanks, you too. All right, so now I'm just going to turn off the mic and camera and be back in 7 or 8 minutes. See you soon. I am back. Welcome back to the Dan Norton Show after the break. I just need to change my screen name back on Zoom so it says Dan Norton. There we go. I see Evolutionary has entered the chat. He says, "Hey Dan, the YouTube algorithm recommended me an Ayn Rand Institute video that summed up my concerns with Ayn Rand's egoism. It's titled Q&A on the best objective objections to objectivism." Interesting. Both the first criticism at 8:15 and also 40:15. When you get the chance, I'd like to hear your response to those criticisms. I was not happy with the answers provided in the video. Okay. I'll look at those. I don't know if I'll look at them on stream today, but at least it's after the stream, if not during the stream. But thanks for mentioning that. I'm looking back to see what this big discussion between Robert and Hookham was about. Mark is giving a meal for thought, says Hookham. Chat, are any of you firefighters? Greg says, I am not a firefighter, but I did have to call to report one. Because of where I live, I had to describe where the fire was, not having a specific address, so 911 knew which fire department to send. Hookham says, I think this is a hard sell for the average person because they, quote, need the, quote, guarantee that comes with excessive spending, like a parent, quote, needs to guarantee their child makes it to their friend's house by driving them instead of watching them or walking them. So far, firehouses are excessive. Maybe I should bring up my video, at least show the video in the thumbnails where I mentioned firefighting. Oh, actually, I put in firefighting and I searched for it on my channel, and th 3 videos came up that are relevant, actually. Yeah, I'll share this screen. Okay, so I just typed here firefighting in the search box on my channel, and here's the first one that came up. Voluntary funding of roads, firefighting, and police. That was from 4 years ago. So if you don't have taxation, here I actually give a script of the whole video. Coercive taxation should be abolished. It's immoral to forcibly take people's wealth. When I say this to people, they often respond by saying something like, well, if you didn't have taxation, what about the roads? What would happen to firefighting or police? So this video addresses that kind of response. Now, of those 3 that I mentioned in the title here, roads should be private, firefighting should be private, And police should not. That's the one government function among these three that should remain as a government function, because that deals with the initiation of force. And that's what the government is supposed to do, protect us from force. Firefighting isn't protecting you from force. Force is here. What that means is coercion initiated by a human being. Likewise, roads, that's not protecting you from force. But police does. Um, but you still might have a question as to, even if these are privately funded, roads and firefighting, just how would that work out? And there's a lot more you can say than I do in this video. This is only a 2-minute video, not even 2 minutes. So I just say a few things. And Mark said much more. Mark Moses, when he was on here, he had a lot more to say about firefighting than I do. So it was good to have him on. Here's another video I made that involves fires after the LA fires. I made this short video. That's why it shows up like this vertical style portrait mode instead of this horizontal mode. I talked about how we need a free market to effectively deal with wildfires. And this video doesn't mention firefighting in the title, but oh, maybe it popped up because I linked to my other video that does mention firefighting. Yeah, the one voluntary funding of roads, firefighting, and police. In this video, I linked to that video. So I guess that's why this showed up. Why do you see foxes over here? I think that's because I talked about how if as rational human beings, we should deal with each other by reason and persuasion, not by force, which is how animals deal with each other. So I was drawing a contrast between the human way of existence and the animal way of existence. And taxes involve forcing people. It's a coercive way of dealing. So it's an animalistic, brutish, uncivilized way of dealing with each other. And I think that's why I have this slide of the foxes in there. And there's one other video. I'll do a search here on taxes now, because there's one other video I want to mention now. This is the one I was thinking of: how to fund the government without taxes. So I don't know if I mentioned firefighting, but it's a broader scope than just roads, police, and firefighting. I talk more broadly about considerations having to do with government funding when you do not have taxes. And I think I say, like, if you didn't have all these hundreds of billions or $1 trillion programs like Social Security and Medicare, then it would be much easier to fund the government without taxes, because you wouldn't have to raise that much money. I do think that you probably couldn't have programs like Social Security or Medicare without taxes. I don't think you can voluntarily raise that much funding, but those shouldn't be government programs to begin with. Likewise, the war on drugs, which costs billions of dollars, there shouldn't even be a program like that, because using drugs does not involve coercing people. It should be a free decision that adults can make whether or not to use drugs. You shouldn't have a war fighting against that, and then imprisoning people and paying for their food in prison for who knows how many years or decades. So if you properly restrict the scope of government, which is a point Mark was talking about when he was on here, you have this scope creep. If you have government doing more and more things that it shouldn't be doing, then it's going to be out of control when it comes to the spending it does. And there's not going to be a way to finance that by voluntary means. You're going to have to force people to do it. Because there's so many things that are not in their interest that you have as programs. But if you restrict programs to just the police, military, and courts, And it's clearly in everyone's interest to have those functions. So we don't have robbers, rapists, and murderers running around. We got to have police to get them off the streets, and we got to need a military to protect us from being conquered by some foreign country. That's obviously in our self-interest, and people would uh, have a big motivation to voluntarily fund those functions of government. So if you properly restrict government to those functions that protect people from force, then you can fund the government without taxes. Okay, I'm going to stop that screen share now. Come back to the chat. Myonely Millie is in the chat. New person. Hello. And Florida Nick is here. Hi, Florida. Hi, Florida Nick. See, the last chat I was reading I was up to Robert's chat. I was thinking maybe I could show these chats on the screen while I'm streaming. I wonder if that would be a good idea. You know how some streamers actually do that, and I showed another streamer doing that, the communist streamer who I was reacting to several live streams ago. She had a chat that was displayed on her screen. I could also share my own chat on the screen. I wonder if that would be better. I could do a poll actually. Um, so just to show you what it would look like, I'll share the screen right now. So there it is. So here's the last chat that I was up to. I was trying to catch up, and I think the next one I was going to read was from Robert, who says, "Wow. Well, people can and should certainly have a variety of homeowners coverages, including fire insurance, which in a free market would pay for fire departments." And then we've got Hookem. I think a few examples of our ideas working in these areas would help persuade others. So I'm curious what you all think. Do you like the idea of when I'm going through the chat, do you like it if I display it like this on screen or not? I'm going to stop that just for now, and I will do a poll in the YouTube chat. I'm curious to see what people think. All right. So here's the question I'm writing. Do you prefer that I display the YouTube chat on screen when I'm engaging with it? And the options are yes, no. I could add a maybe. Sure, I'll do that. I don't know why someone might want that, but maybe there is a reason. Okay, I just started the poll. So now you can vote on that question. Do you prefer that I display the YouTube chat on screen when I'm engaging with it? Got one vote so far, and this is anonymous. I'm not going to know who votes for what. All it does is show me the total number of votes for each choice. So I'm not going to know who votes for what, in case that's a concern for anyone. All right, I'll leave that up for a few minutes. And I will take this opportunity to say thanks everyone for the likes and any new subscribers. Thank you for subscribing. I gotta grab my laptop cord. The battery is getting a little bit low. Now I'm plugged in. So far, only one vote on the poll. I had a lot more votes last time I did a poll. I think 8 people voted. Maybe people are still thinking about their answer. They're not sure what to choose. I hope you all can see that. I don't know if it makes a difference as to whether you're on a laptop or a phone. I'm going to my phone now to see if I can see the poll in the chat. No, I don't see the poll when I look on my phone. So maybe you're only able to see the poll if you're using a laptop, and maybe that's why there aren't many votes. Because I think a lot of people do watch me on their phones. You can also just tell me your answer in the chat if you don't mind everyone knowing your choice. Looks like some people are coming back after the break because when I take a break, the number of viewers usually goes down, but now it's gone back up a bit. How do you engage these city councils? Asks Hookem. What do they need? What do they respond most to? What is a fruitful opening? I think we covered that at least somewhat when Mark was here. So hopefully that at least partially answered your question. Tennessee has a more privatized approach in areas for fire departments. They have sent the trucks out to protect a home that pays from a fire spreading home that did not. Do y'all think there will be robots taking the responsibilities of careers like firefighters before these changes are implemented? That could add safety, right? If a robot can put the fire out or a drone can put the fire out instead of firefighters. But of course, if you have some contract with the city that says we're forcing the city to supply jobs to human beings to be firefighters, then that's going to delay the takeover of jobs by robots or drones, which is bad, right? That's a violation of freedom. The city has no right to force people to fund jobs of a certain kind. Crime rates are static to down in most places, says Robert. Of course, things should be even better than they are. A better culture leading to more freedom and consequent prosperity will help with that. And yes, technology, connectivity, robotics, and automation will have a positive impact on firefighting, policing, and poverty, all to the good. It's going to be awesome. Go Team Dagny, says Robert, with a reference there to Dagny Taggart from Atlas Shrugged. All right, let me look at the more recent chats. Just make a note of where I left off in reading these chats. All right, I see a lot of chats from Evolutionary and some chats from My Onely. I don't know how to pronounce that. My Only, My Only, Millie. And several chats from Jason. I might need a snack soon. I'm gonna just turn off my camera for a bit. I'm not gonna I'll leave my mic on. Maybe I'll read through some of these chats and comment on them while I'm having a snack. And I'll just turn off my mic. Or, I mean, turn off my camera. All right, camera's back. I just had a small bite to eat. I think that should hold me for at least 30 minutes. All right, what's all this talk about between Evolutionary and others? Did you watch that my comments on the altruism video from the Khan Academy, the one that mentioned altruism? I think that was 2 shows ago that I reacted to that video. That was another video that Evolutionary wanted me to watch. If you don't have coercive action, what stops people from free riding? Asks Evolutionary. Well, one thing that could stop them or make de-incentivize them is getting a bad reputation. Like if you're a free rider, I might not want to deal with you as a friend or as a business. If you're a business and you don't contribute money to the government voluntarily to finance police, then maybe you won't get my business. And maybe businesses that do contribute money or individuals who contribute money, they can get some kind of, they can be put on a list somewhere which is publicly viewable. So people can see, oh, you've contributed to this list. And I want to support people like that. So maybe now I'll be your friend or I will patronize your business. Whereas if you're not on the list, then maybe I'll take my business and my friendship elsewhere. So you can put social pressure on people um, who free ride. You can reward people socially who do, and economically reward them by giving them your business. And you can penalize people by not giving them your business, by not giving them your business or your friendship, which is not necessarily to say you should. Maybe there are circumstances where someone is having a really tough time and they're not able to contribute. But if it seems like someone is doing very well for themselves, but they refuse to contribute, then maybe it would be appropriate to disassociate in some way from that individual. So there are ways to put pressure other than coercion. Okay, some discussion of firefighting between Jason and Evolutionary. About letting people's houses burn. Hmm. Evolutionary says, I do agree with objectivists in that I don't think the market will provide protection for Lockean rights. The market is too efficient to protect something that is inefficient. I don't know that I would say the market will not provide for protection for Lockean rights. I don't know. I don't know why you say objectivist would not think the market will provide for protection for Lockean rights. If that means like people need to be coerced to get something like police who protect our rights. Uh, that's not the objectivist view. It's in people's self-interest. It's clearly in people's self-interest to have police. So that can be done in a voluntary way. There are charities now, even with all the taxation, there are still charities where people are not forced to contribute, but they voluntarily choose to contribute to some cause. My only Mully says it shouldn't be a market for profit when it's about human life. Public service sector shouldn't be private. Do you think some people should be forced to support others? Do you think some people or all people should live for the sake of others? Is it my duty to live for other people? That would be an altruistic view of morality. Or can I pursue my own profit and be moral? On Rand's view, it's moral to pursue your own life and happiness. It's not my duty to live for other people. So maybe we have two people from the left. I know Evolutionary. He's from the political left, I guess. But maybe that's also true of my only Millie, or however you pronounce that screen name. All right. So there's a lot I could engage with here, but I'm not sure I want to do that right now because I've been going for close to 3 hours. Maybe it's better to save it for another stream. Okay. I think I'm going to end the stream for today. I'm feeling a bit exhausted, and I think I need a break, not just like a short break. So, but we can continue discussing these kinds of topics that you're raising in the chat. No, you're not a capitalist. Evolutionary says, no, Dan, I'm a capitalist. Now, if you promote coercion, you're not a capitalist. Lots of people misconstrue what capitalism is. Like, yeah. And they think today's society is a capitalist society with all its taxes and regulations. Um, the way I understand capitalism and the way I think it's properly understood is there is no coercion, meaning initiation of force, and that means there are no taxes and regulations. Okay, you say not capitalist in the Randian sense. Okay. Well, I think the Randian sense is the proper sense. So, if you're not a capitalist in the Randian sense, then I don't think you're a capitalist at all, even though many people use the term for themselves. I don't think it's a proper usage of the term. Because if Rand is a capitalist, then I don't think there's anything essentially similar between her and today's mixed economy, where we have tons of taxes and regulations. I don't think you can put those two in the same category. and call both capitalists and have that be a useful, meaningful concept, um, you have to use different terms. Um, so you either have to say you're a capitalist and I'm not, or I'm a capitalist and you're not, but we can't both be capitalists because our views are radically different. It's just confusing to use the term capitalist for both. Uh, you say definition is arbitrary. Rand's definition is very idiosyncratic. I don't think definition is arbitrary. Um, Her definition is based on fundamental issues, the issue of rights. That's how she defines capitalism in terms of rights. And then she defines rights in terms of force, I think. I can actually I'll pull that up now. I guess uh I feel like my motivation has picked up talking about this topic. Something about it got me a little excited. So let me oh yeah, capitalism. I was going to look up in the Ayn Rand lexicon. I was going to show her definition. Here, let me share this. Okay, there it is. Capitalism is a social system based on the recognition of individual rights, including property rights, in which all property is privately owned. So this definition refers to the term rights, and rights, I would guess, is explained in terms of force because you can only violate someone's rights on Ayn Rand's view if you initiate force against them. So I want to go to this entry over here on individual rights in a second, but first I was just going to mention that socialism is often defined in terms of government owns the means of production. So here she's saying all property is privately owned, not government owned. That would be socialism. But then you can have mixtures, right? You can have some things that are government owned, some things that are privately owned. Like, didn't Trump recently try to get a 10% ownership stake in Intel? So now that company is partly government owned, or it will be. I don't remember exactly, but you can have mixtures where it's not the case that everything is government property and nothing is government property. You can have a mixed economy. Um, but I think coercion is the fundamental issue in political philosophy. Whether you deal with people by force or by persuasion, which is not what happened with Charlie Kirk, right? He was trying to exercise his right to persuade people, his right to free speech, and then someone else uses coercion to stop him from doing that. That's the fundamental issue in political philosophy. Do we engage with each other by force or by voluntary means? So eh, that is not an arbitrary distinction. So definitions are not arbitrary. Or if you define political systems or social systems in terms of whether people deal with each other by force or by persuasion, that is not an arbitrary distinction. That is a very profound, fundamental distinction. And I think a political philosopher is right to feature that distinction in her definition of a system. which I think Rand does here by the mentioning rights. So let me go to the rights entry now and see if there's anything about force in there. So here she says, a right is a moral principle defining and sanctioning a man's freedom of action in a social context. Now, maybe there's an implicit reference to force here because freedom is defined as in opposition to force. When you are free to do something, it means you're doing it freely. You're not being forced to do it. But yes, in her second paragraph, she brings up the issue of force, or she uses the term compulsion. That's where in coercion, yeah, these are other terms for force. The concept of a right pertains only to action, specifically to freedom of action. It means freedom from physical compulsion, coercion, or interference by other men. Now, that's a very fundamental point. I think that's the proper way to understand freedom, as in, as a contrast to when you are compelled, coerced by other men. I'll just read this paragraph. For every individual, a right is the moral sanction of a positive of his freedom to act on his own judgment for his own goals by his own voluntary, uncoerced choice. As to his neighbors, his rights impose no obligations on them except of a negative kind to abstain from violating his rights. I see there's another entry over here for specifically on physical force. Let's see what that says. Okay, I'm not going to read all of that. The basic political principle of the objectivist ethics is no man may initiate the use of physical force against others. No man or group or society or government has the right to assume the role of a criminal and initiate the use of physical compulsion against any man. Okay, so there's some comments from Ayn Rand that are relevant to the discussion that was going on in the chat. Many more chats here from Evolutionary. Okay, so maybe we can engage more on this topic in the future, Rand's definition of capitalism. But I do think I'll just repeat that I don't think it makes sense to call both Rand's system and whatever you stand for capitalism because there's radical differences. Would you at least agree with that? Like, forget the word capitalism for a second. Shouldn't we at least, would you agree that we should at least have different labels for the different viewpoints? And we shouldn't call both your view and Rand's view by the same term. I don't know if you already said something about that in the chat, but um, maybe that would be a good starting point for this kind of discussion. You say Rand's definition doesn't match economics' definition. Well, set that aside for the moment. Uh, whether it does or doesn't match, just do you agree that given the way she understands it and given the way you understand it, the same term should not be used for both? The way terms are conventionally defined may have problems. Maybe they involve package deals. That's a term Rand uses, where they combine essentially different sorts of things. So I think part of the job of a philosopher is to raise questions about the way concepts are conventionally understood and point out if and when people's understanding of a concept is flawed. So I don't think one should just take for granted that because certain concepts are being used in a certain way that means they have some coherent meaning. Maybe the way the terms are conventionally used or defined involves some kind of incoherence or contradiction, um, or a combining of essentially different things which shouldn't be combined together. And I think one of the jobs of a philosopher is to pay attention to that. Are concepts being defined in a proper way? And what is a proper way? Um, um, Speech is not violence. That's a phrase that has been coming up lately in connection with the Charlie Kirk shooting. He was just speaking, and some people will say speech is violence. No, it's not. What's that saying? Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Well, maybe they can hurt you emotionally, but that's a different sort of thing than sticks and stones or guns. Um, I thought of this when my only Millie says violence isn't just allowed by global capitalism. No, it's not. It's not allowed. If you properly understand violence, which you don't, if you think speech is violence. So in this also, it's not just the term violence, also the term force, coercion. I think all these terms are misunderstood often. Um, and they have to be properly defined, just as capitalism has to be properly defined. So I'm going to make a note here on my file here of things to discuss. I'm going to say, should Rand's and evolutionaries' political systems be called different things, setting aside the issue of what particular label to use. That's just a question which I want to record for future use because I think that's an important question. There's also the question of, oh yeah, I've asked this before, but I don't know that I've gotten an answer to it yet, but why should I live for something other than or why shouldn't I live for myself? Because evolutionary, he's a utilitarian, not an egoist. And I want to know why. Like, why shouldn't I live for myself? He said before, well, there's more to the world or the universe than yourself. It goes on after you die. But my response is, I don't care. Why should that matter to me? I want to make the most of my life. So I'm just going to put these questions under the heading of questions for evolutionary. I'm trying to get to fundamental questions so that we can have productive discussions. And um, to do that, I think we need to address the most fundamental questions, not derivative questions. Like if we have a disagreement about arithmetic, it's no use in talking about algebra, right? Because algebra is based on arithmetic. If you don't first understand and agree on arithmetic, there's no point talking about algebra. Likewise, I want to find the most basic things that we have a disagreement about and then address those. And before we've talked about determinism being a fundamental point of disagreement, but he's more interested in talking about ethical and political issues than the issue of determinism. So insofar as it's possible, I'm trying to set aside that issue and see if there's a way to productively discuss other issues in ethics and politics. And so, in an effort to have that sort of productive discussion, I'm just making a note of these questions about fundamental issues that I think need to be addressed. Oh, I forgot to stop sharing the screen. Okay, now maybe I should put those questions in the chat and they'll stand out more. You say actually arithmetic is based on algebra. So you have to learn algebra first. Okay, well, I don't agree, but you get the point though. Some things are more basic than others. So if you think algebra is more basic than arithmetic, then we have to agree about algebra first. But whatever is the most basic thing, that's what I want to focus on. So I'm going to put these, maybe I'll do one question at a time. I'm copying and I'm going to paste. There's one question. I just put it in the chat. Oh, I should have put questions singular, not questions plural. But the first one I put in there was, why shouldn't I live for myself? All right, I'm not going to debate whether arithmetic is more basic than algebra right now. Um, I don't want to get sidetracked. I feel like that's kind of going to just be a distraction. And I want to avoid this discussion just sprawling all over the place. So I want to focus on just what I think is essential. Second question for evolutionary. Should Rand's and evolutionary's political systems be called by different names, setting aside the particular issue of what name to use? Okay, so hopefully by putting those two questions in the chat, that will give them more emphasis and we can use those as kind of anchor points, or at least I will try to use those as anchor points for future discussions. Um, this will help me remember where we left off and what I think is a productive place to start for future discussion. And I think I know I've asked the first one before. Why shouldn't I live for myself? And I don't think I ever got an answer to that one. I don't remember ever seeing a reply to that. Unless you just consider the reply of, oh, well, the world goes on after you die. But so if that's your reply, then my response is just, why should I care about that? You say, well, economics already had the term capitalism, which most people except libertarians and objectivists use. That's not the question. That's not an answer to my question. You're talking about uh, what economics already has a term. My question is just, should the same term be used for your system and for Rand's system? Yes or no? You say you call your brand of capitalism evolutionary capitalism. Yeah, again, that's not the question. I know what you call it. The question is, should the same term be used? Okay, you're not answering the question. You say if there is a burden to change the term, that lies with objectivists. Why aren't you answering the question? You shouldn't live for yourself because that's not what evolution created you for. I think you're personifying evolution there. I don't care what evolution created me for. All right, we got an answer. No, they shouldn't use the same term because that creates confusion and conflation. All right, I'm glad we at least we got an answer. Okay, so we agree that the same term should not be used. Okay. Well, thank you for answering that question. Finally. John Wayne is here. Hi, John. He says, evolutionary capitalism sounds like a terrible joke. and then the hyphen utilitarianism. So, okay. I'm thinking we've got two issues on the table. So I put those two questions in the chat, and maybe it's better just to focus on one so we don't uh, maybe it's better to focus on one because otherwise we won't make progress as likely. Well, it'll be confusing if we're talking about two different issues. So uh, I guess we can focus on the second question I put in there first, since maybe there's more related to that going on right now in the chat. Okay, so and that's the one that you answered with the all caps. He said, no, they shouldn't use the same term because that creates confusion and conflation. Okay, I agree with you there. So now the question is, who should use the term? If either, I mean, you could have the view that neither Rand nor yourself should use the term capitalism, or you could have the view that only you should use it, or only Rand should use it, but certainly not both. We agree on that because the systems are radically different. So you want to use this term, so why should you be the one who gets to use it? Now, I think Rand is widely recognized as promoting capitalism even by her opponents. And, there's so many people who are anti-capitalists. Uh, uh, so it's not just like a unique uh, view Ayn Rand has that she promotes capitalism. You have many people on the left criticizing Rand for her promotion of capitalism. So I don't think it's you said before it's like an idiosyncratic definition, and you say this burden to change the term lies with Rand, but I don't know why do you say it's idiosyncratic given that it's widely thought. Now maybe you think most people are mistaken. Maybe you think a lot of leftists are mistaken to be criticizing capitalism. Maybe Sam Cedar, I don't think he's uh, a proponent of capitalism. And you said I think you heard about me through the Majority Report, Sam Cedar show. I think a lot of people in the Majority Report audience, many people on the left, oppose what they call capitalism. So maybe you're the one who's got an idiosyncratic understanding of capitalism. If you think, if you agree with a view like Sam Cedars, yet you want to call yourself a capitalist, and Sam Cedar and his crowd are anti-capitalists and would even say that. Okay, you say when a term already exists and someone like Rand redefines it, the burden lies with Rand to distinguish her brand. So when did this term first start being used? Didn't Marx, was Marx the first one to define it or use it? I don't know. I think I've heard it said that this term capitalism originated with Marx, who was writing in the mid 19th century, at least the Communist Manifesto. That was 1849, right? I don't know if he defines capitalism there or in his book, his work, Capital, Das Kapital, if he defines capitalism there. I, I think Rand says somewhere that if you look at the essence of what Marx is critiquing, it is a voluntary system. So it's something uh, basically like she defines capitalism to be. And I guess you can't, if you abstract out the essence of of the system that Marx is opposing, maybe that will allow you to formulate a definition of it, even if Marx himself didn't define it that way. Um, So, you say it matters what the current conventional definition is. Well, what if the conventional definition is confused? And what if it embodies confusion? Like I think it's commonly said that Rand advocates capitalism, but it's often commonly said by the same people that today's system is capitalist. But those two are radically different. So today's system, as I don't know if you heard the earlier talk with Mark Moses, all these government interventions into the local um, government monopolies of utilities, um, roads, I'll throw in post office, Social Security, Medicare, public education, all that stuff is antithetical to Rand's system. So how can the same people call Rand's system capitalism and also call today's system with all that stuff, public education, Social Security, Medicare, etc., capitalist? So if the conventional understanding or definition includes both Rand's system and today's system, would you agree there's a problem with the conventional understanding or definition? Maybe that's another question I should put in the chat. Okay, you give a definition from Wikipedia. Capitalism is an economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production and their use for the purpose of obtaining profit. This phrase means of production, I'm not really comfortable with, but I know it's often used in definitions of capitalism and socialism. And I think even Rand, did Rand mention, does she use means of production in her definition of, no, she doesn't use means of production. Maybe, I wonder if she uses it anywhere else, like in a definition of socialism. She says, maybe I should so just to repeat her definition of capitalism, it's capitalism is a social system based on the recognition of individual rights, including property rights, in which all property is privately owned. Sure, I'll share that again on the screen. That's what I just read. There's no mention of means of production there. Maybe for good reason, because I'm not sure that's a good term. Like, is a human being a means of production? Human beings produce things. So are they means of production? Can you own means of production if human beings are means of production? I think they're defining a system in terms of the means of production might be a bad idea, even though it is commonly done. As I said, I think one of the jobs of philosophers is to clean up definitions if they have problems. Um, I want to see if she uses that term means of production in her definition of socialism, if there is one here. Oh, here's an entry for socialism. Okay, so socialism is the doctrine that man has no right to exist for his own sake, that his life and his work do not belong to him, but belong to society, that the only justification of his existence is his service to society, and that society may dispose of him in any way it pleases for the sake of whatever it deems to be its own tribal collective good. No, I don't think a socialist would define it that way because it sounds pretty bad, but um, maybe I don't know that this is even a definition. It's a characterization, but I don't know that she would consider that a definition. But you can bring it, you can say, well, this is what the essence of socialism is, even if they don't state it themselves that way. And maybe they don't state it themselves that way because then it would make too obvious that their view is evil. But let's see what else it says here. The essential characteristic of socialism is the denial of individual property rights, because they talk about the abolition of private property, right? I think that's in the Communist Manifesto, the abolition of private property. Under socialism, the right to property, which is the right of use and disposal, is vested in, quote, society as a whole, unquote, i.e., in the collective, with production and distribution controlled by the state, i.e., by the government. And then she says, socialism may be established by force, as in the USSR, or by vote, as in Nazi Germany, National Socialist Germany. Sometimes people say, oh, it's just a name. They just call themselves socialists, but they weren't really that. The alleged goals of socialism were the abolition of private property, the achievement of general prosperity, progress, peace, and human brotherhood. The results have been a terrifying failure. Terrifying, that is, if one's motive is men's welfare. So I was going to see if she used means of production anywhere. No, I just searched for means of P and nothing pops up. So she doesn't define socialism in terms of means of production, even though I think socialists often do, government ownership of the means of production. Capitalism, I'll do a search on that also. Means of production. Nope, there's no entry there. So she doesn't use this phrase means of production. And I don't really see a good reason to use that phrase. I'm not sure that it has a clear meaning. Like you might think it refers to factory equipment, but I don't think that's getting to essentials. Who created the factory equipment? It had to be some individual human being or a number of individual human beings. Ultimately, human beings are the sources of production, not machines, right? Humans have to create the machines. So are humans now means of production? Should humans be socially owned if you want government ownership of the means of production? Is that slavery? To own human beings? So, but also there shouldn't be private ownership of the means of production if the means of production includes human beings. So, I don't think, if you think about it, that means of production is really a valid term to use in a definition of capitalism or social systems, or I mean, capitalism or socialism. Even if that's part of the conventional understanding, maybe the conventional understanding is very flawed. Okay, there's a lot more chats from Evolutionary here. All right. Well, I've given you some things to consider. So about the definitions and maybe we can continue this discussion another time. But I think I want to wrap things up soon. I forgot to end the poll. Oh, I see there are 5 votes now. So the poll question I put in the chat was, do you prefer that I display the YouTube chat on screen when I'm engaging with it? And 5 votes. Here, I'm going to just end the poll. So now you can see the results in the chat. 40% said yes, 40% said maybe, and 20% said no. So that means 2 said yes, 2 said maybe, 1 said no. All right, so I guess it's there's not a clear mandate from the chat, at least, that I should display it. So maybe I'll think about it more. You can all think about it more, and maybe we can revisit that issue later. Evolutionary says, okay, see you, Dan. All right. See you later. Thanks for participating. Thanks for everyone. Thanks to everyone for participating. And thanks for coming by the live stream or watching it later. If you are not listening to this live, thanks for watching or listening to this later. Thanks for all of your likes, your subscribes, comments, shares. And oh, I got to stop the screen share here. So I'm going to end today's stream and we can continue the conversation in another stream. I will probably stream in 4 days. So that would be Thursday. Uh, yeah, I'll plan to do a stream on Thursday. This is not set in stone. Things can change, but probably around this same time on Thursday will be my next stream. All right. Have a good rest of your weekend, day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.